My name is Dana. I am 29 years old, and by profession, I am a DEI strategist, a radical legal consultant, and a social engineer. My career is not merely a job, it is a relentless, clinical operation. I do not improve corporate cultures, I dismantle the rotting foundations of the old world. I identify the systemic impurities, the men who have spent centuries accumulating a biological and historical debt, and I ensure they are out of the social and economic equation. To some, I am a ghost in the HR machine. To others, I am a guillotine. The car stopped at the edge of the forest, the tires crunching over gravel that sounded like breaking bone. I looked out the window at the entrance of the Verdant Sanctuary, a digital detox camp hidden deep within the mountains, far from the nearest cell tower of any reputable provider. It was a place for the weary, the burned out, and those who had become slaves to the screen. My firm, Axiom Equitiners, had suggested this retreat. They called it preventative maintenance. I knew better. They were frightened of my efficiency. They saw the way I had liquidated the entire board of Vanguard Industrial Solutions in a single fiscal quarter, and they wanted to dull my edge. They thought a week of silence and cedar trees would soften the cold, hard logic of my mission. They were wrong. I stepped out of the vehicle, my boots hitting the dirt with a purposeful thud. I wore charcoal gray, functional, sterile, and void of any feminine softness that might be interpreted as an invitation for dialogue. A woman approached me, her face glowing with that peculiar, terrifying brand of manufactured serenity. She wore a linen tunic and carried a clipboard made of reclaimed wood. "Welcome, Dana," she said, her voice a soft hum. "I am Julianne. Here at the Verdant Sanctuary, we strip away the noise so you can hear your own heart again." "I can hear my heart perfectly fine, Julianne," I replied, my voice flat. "It beats 72 times per minute. It functions as a pump for oxygenated blood. I am here because my contract mandates a period of restorative leave. Let's get the intake over with." Julianne blinked, her smile faltering for a microsecond before snapping back into place. "Of course. We'll need your devices. All of them. Tablets, laptops, smartwatches, and phones. We provide a secure lockbox. You'll get them back in 7 days." I reached into my bag and produced my primary phone, a sleek, company-issued device. I handed it over with a practiced indifference. I also handed over a tablet I hadn't used in months. These were my decoys. They were the official extensions of my persona. What Julianne didn't know was that tucked into the hidden, lead-lined comment of my medical kit, disguised as a container for feminine hygiene products, was the shadow device. It was a specialized, encrypted satellite-link phone I had acquired through a contact at Cyphertronics Systems. It bypassed local towers. It was my scalpel, and I never traveled without it. The sanctuary was a collection of cabins designed to look rustic, but costing more per night than a luxury suite in the city. There were 12 of us in this cohort. Mostly women, mostly professionals, all of them looking fragile. They moved through the woods like ghosts, their hands twitching at their sides, phantom limbs reaching for the scrolls of their social media feeds. I watched them with a mixture of pity and contempt. They were victims of the very system I was trying to burn down, yet they lacked the iron will to be its executioners. My cabin was small, smelling of pine and forced simplicity. As soon as the door clicked shut, I didn't look at the view of the lake. I didn't breathe in the mountain air. I went straight to the medical kit. I pulled out the shadow device. The screen glowed, a cold blue light in the dim cabin. I had work to do. Back in the city, a man named Arthur Sterling was still breathing the air of a free executive. Arthur was the vice president of Foundry Global, and he was my current project. He was old guard, the kind of man who thought a firm handshake and a robust personality justified a history of microaggressions and exclusionary hiring practices. I had been building a file on him for months. I didn't need to invent lies. I simply needed to curate the truth into a lethal narrative. I had recordings of his off-the-cuff remarks at a gala 3 years ago. I had a string of emails where his tone towards female subordinates could be legally interpreted as creating a hostile psychological environment. I sat on the edge of the bed, the peaceful sounds of the forest muted by the walls, and I began to transmit. I sent a series of encrypted packets to a junior associate at the Chrono Sentinel, a digital news outlet that lived for the kind of ideological cleansing I provided. By tomorrow morning, Arthur Sterling would be a pariah. By the end of the week, he would be a memory. The next morning, we were gathered in the circle of reflection. We sat on floor cushions in a circle. Julianne stood in the center, holding a bowl of water. Today, Julianne whispered, we discuss the weight we carry. The digital world is a weight of expectations, of male-driven algorithms that tell us who to be. Let us release that weight. A woman named Sarah, a high-level marketing executive from Neon Pulse Media, began to cry. She spoke about the pressure to be always on, the fear of missing a notification, the way her phone felt like a tether to a life she didn't want. I looked at her. Her pain was real, but her solution was pathetic. She wanted to unplug. I wanted to seize the plug and electrocute the men holding the other end. Dana, Julianne said, her eyes fixing on mine. You've been very quiet. What weight have you brought to the sanctuary? I straightened my spine. I don't carry weight, Julianne. I carry tools. The digital world isn't a cloud of abstract noise to me. It is a battlefield. If you feel weighed down by it, it's because you are a casualty, not a combatant. The room went silent. Sarah wiped her eyes, looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. A combatant? Julianne asked, her voice tilting upward. Against whom? Against the structural rot that built this cabin, this camp, and the companies you all work for, I said. Every minute you spend reflecting in the woods is a minute the patriarchy uses to further solidify its hold on the infrastructure of the future. You think you're healing. You're actually just surrendering. You're taking a timeout while the enemy continues to play the game. We don't use words like enemy here, Julianne said firmly. We practice radical empathy. Empathy is a patriarchal trap, I replied. It is the chain they use to keep you from swinging the axe. If you empathize with your oppressor, you become his accomplice. I have no empathy. I have an objective. I stood up and walked out. I didn't need their circle. I didn't need their water. I needed my device. Back in the cabin, I checked the progress of the Sterling liquidation. The Chrono Sentinel had picked up the story. The Sterling Files, a pattern of systemic exclusion. It was trending. I could see the comments, thousands of voices demanding his resignation. I felt a surge of cold, clinical satisfaction. This was the only connection that mattered. Not the touch of a hand or the warmth of a fire, but the digital erasure of a target. However, a new message appeared on my encrypted channel. It was from an anonymous source within Axiom Equitiners. * Dana, be careful. There's a rumor that the sanctuary isn't just a retreat. They've been hiring security consultants lately. They're looking for ideological outliers. * I narrowed my eyes. Security consultants? At a detox camp? I began to scan the cabin. I looked at the smoke detector, the light fixtures, the small wooden carving of an owl on the mantel. My paranoia wasn't a disorder, it was a survival mechanism. In my world, everyone was a potential informant. I had spent my life building files on others. It was only logical that someone was building one on me. I decided to run a test. There was a young woman at the camp named Maya. She was 27, a junior researcher at Biogenetics Research Lab. She was sharp, observant, and had a cynical edge that the others lacked. I had noticed her watching me during the group sessions. She didn't cry when the others did. She didn't buy Julianne's Serenity Act. That evening, I found Maya sitting by the lake, staring at the water. I sat down next to her, keeping a respectful, tactical distance. It's a lie, isn't it? I asked. Maya didn't look at me. Which? The healing or the detox? All of it. It's a holding pen. They take the women who are most likely to cause trouble in the corporate world, bring them here, and try to lobotomize them with mindfulness so they go back to being compliant cogs. Maya turned to look at me. Her eyes were bright, intelligent, and predatory. I thought I was the only one who saw it. My boss at Biogenetics practically forced me into the car. He said I was becoming a disruption to the team harmony. That's code for you're starting to ask questions about the pay gap and the promotion track, I said. Exactly, Maya whispered. I felt a rare impulse. I wanted to see if Maya was a potential ally or a potential tool. I reached into the pocket of my coat and let the corner of the shadow device peek out. Just for a second. Maya's breath hitched. Is that? How do you have that? They scanned my bags with a metal detector. They use a standard magnetic resonance sweep, I explained, my voice a low murmur. It's easily bypassed with a lead-lined dampening field. I'm still connected, Maya. I'm still working. While these people are staring at trees, I'm ending the career of a man who's spent 20 years stepping on women like us. Maya looked at the device, then back at me. Teach me. Show me how you do it. I felt a spark of something. Not warmth, never warmth, but a sense of legacy. I began to explain the process. I told her about the legal loopholes, the way I used equity audits to find the ideological flaws in male managers. I explained how to record a conversation without it being inadmissible, how to use cancel culture not as a mob, but as a precision instrument of social engineering. Every man is born with a debt, I told her, the words flowing with the rhythm of a mantra. They're the beneficiaries of a system designed to erase us. Therefore, their erasure is not a crime, it is an act of historical balancing. We don't negotiate. We don't collaborate. We purge. Maya listened, nodding, her eyes wide. And Julianne? The camp. Julianne is a collaborator, I said. She's the kind face of the patriarchy. She helps them keep the status quo by making the victims feel like the problem is their own stress rather than the system itself. She's an ideological fugitive. I have a file on her, too. For the next 2 days, Maya was my shadow. We skipped the nature walks and the expressive dance sessions. We sat in the shadows of the porch, and I mentored her. I showed her how to use the shadow device to access the deep web archives of Axiom. I showed her the dossiers I had compiled. But then, the atmosphere of the camp shifted. On the 4th night, I was woken by a sound. It wasn't the wind or a forest animal. It was the distinct, electronic beep of a high-end surveillance scanner. It was coming from outside my cabin. I moved to the window, keeping low. In the moonlight, I saw 2 men in dark, tactical gear. They weren't wearing the linen tunics of the sanctuary. They were carrying handheld devices that glowed with a familiar amber light, signal trackers. My blood turned to ice. The verdant sanctuary wasn't just a retreat. It was a trap. Axiom Equitiners hadn't sent me here to rest, they had sent me here to be caught. They knew I was using a secondary device. They had lured me to a black zone, where they could monitor my transmissions without the interference of the city's noise. I grabbed the shadow device and my medical kit. I needed to move. I needed to get to the perimeter. If I could get to the main road, I could flag down a passing truck or, better yet, use the device to call in an extraction from one of the radical legal groups I consulted for. I slipped out the back door, moving through the shadows. I knew the layout of the camp by now. I headed toward the lake, thinking I could circle around to the entrance. Dana. I froze. Maya was standing by the equipment shed. She looked pale, her eyes starting around. Maya, get back to your cabin, I hissed. They're sweeping the area. They're looking for the device. I know, Maya said. Her voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was cold. It was familiar. She stepped into the light. She wasn't holding a bag or a lantern. She was holding a tablet, a high-end, military-grade interface. You told me that every man is a debt, Maya said, her voice echoing my own cadence. But you forgot one thing, Dana. In the system you built, there's no room for mentors. There's only the pure and the impure. And you? You've become a liability. I looked at her, truly looked at her. I saw the way she held herself. She wasn't a victim of biogenetics. She was a social auditor from the Hegemony Group, a rival firm that was even more radical than my own. You're the security consultant, I whispered. I'm the upgrade, Maya replied. You've spent so much time looking for the enemy among the men that you failed to see the evolution right in front of you. You're old guard, Dana. You still believe in files and legal loopholes. I believe in total systemic erasure. And that includes those who are no longer useful to the cause. I made you, I said, a flicker of something, was it anger? Or betrayal, rising in my chest. No, Maya smiled, and it was a jagged, cruel thing. You provided the data. I simply optimized the algorithm. You were seen talking to a male courier last month at the Vesta Plaza. You were seen negotiating a severance package for a male executive you supposedly liquidated. You've become soft. You've started to believe that you are the architect. But the system doesn't need an architect. It needs a virus. The two men in tactical gear emerged from the trees behind her. One of them held a signal jammer. The blue light on my shadow device flickered and died. I was cut off. Dana, Julianne's voice came from the darkness. She stepped out, no longer smiling, her face a mask of corporate coldness. You have violated the core principles of the Verdant Sanctuary. You brought a prohibited device into a sacred space of healing. You have used our grounds to conduct unauthorized ideological warfare. You are no longer welcome here. This is a setup, I spat. You're a Loffit. Axiom paid you to find a reason to fire me without a hostile termination lawsuit. We didn't need to find a reason, Julianne said. You gave us a dozen. Maya has been recording every word you've said for the last 48 hours. Your mentorship was actually a confession of unauthorized data breaches, industrial espionage, and systematic harassment. I looked at Maya. She was tapping away at her tablet, her face illuminated by the screen. She was probably already sending the Dana dossier to the board at Axiom. She was doing to me exactly what I had done to Arthur Sterling. You think you've won? I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I couldn't contain. You're just the next iteration. Someone younger, someone more pure will come for you, too. The system you're serving doesn't want equality. It wants a vacuum. It will eat you, Maya. It will eat you alive. Maya didn't even look up. By the time it does, I'll have already erased you from the record. You won't be a martyr, Dana. You'll be a procedural error that was corrected. They didn't call the police. That would involve a public record. Instead, they escorted me to the gate. My bags were already there, packed by someone else's hands. My official devices were returned to me, wiped clean of all data. Your contract with Axiom Equitiners has been terminated for cause, Julianne said, her voice returning to that soft, rhythmic hum. A courier will deliver your final belongings to your aimant. Do not attempt to contact any of your former associates. A non-disparagement and total silence injunction has already been filed in the Providence District Court. I stood at the gate of the Verdant Sanctuary, the heavy iron bars clicking shut behind me. The mountain air was cold, biting through my thin coat. My shadow device was a useless brick in my pocket. I walked down the gravel road, the sound of my boots now lonely and hollow. I reached for my phone, my regular phone, and turned it on. It buzzed instantly. Not with messages of support, but with notifications. Asterisk the Chronos Sentinel. Internal purge. Axiom Equity's lead strategist fired for ethical violations. Asterisk. Asterisk social thread. The architect of the void gets voided. Karma is a Dana. Asterisk. The files I had built, the lives I had dismantled, it was all being turned against me. The narrative was shifting. I was no longer the executioner. I was the rogue element that had been righteously removed. I stopped walking and looked at the screen. My thumb hovered over the delete button for a notification, then stopped. My hand began to shake. Not from the cold, but from the sudden, terrifying realization of the void I had created. I had no friends. I had ideological allies who had already blocked me. I had no family. I had deemed them genetically compromised years ago. I had no home. My aimant was a sterile white box leased by my firm. I looked back at the dark silhouette of the mountains. I had gone to the camp to escape the noise, but I had brought my own noise with me, a static of hatred and cold logic that had finally drowned me out. I was addicted to the power of the erase button, and now I had been erased. I tried to think of a way back. A legal loophole. A hidden file. A piece of blackmail. But as I scrolled through my contacts, I realized they were all gone. My access codes were invalid. My shadow network had been hijacked. I was Dana. I was 29. I was nothing. The sun began to peek over the horizon, casting a pale, indifferent light over the road. I sat down on my suitcase, the silence of the forest finally reaching me. It wasn't the healing silence Julianne had promised. It was the silence of a tomb. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the shadow device. It was dead, but I stared at the dark screen anyway. I saw my own reflection, pale, sharp-featured, and utterly alone. I had spent my life trying to cleanse the world of its faults, only to find that I had scrubbed away everything that made it worth living in. I didn't cry. I didn't have the biological capacity for it, or so I had told myself. Instead, I just sat there, a systemic architect without a system, a social engineer without a society. I looked at the road ahead. It stretched out, long and empty, leading back to a city that had already forgotten my name. I had set out to build a new world, but I had only succeeded in building a prison with no windows and no doors. And the worst, that finally made my breath catch in my throat, was that I had been the one to lock the door from the inside. I stood up, picked up my suitcase, and started walking. Not toward a goal, but simply away from the ruins of the person I thought I was. The digital world was gone. The forest was indifferent. And for the first time in my life, I had no plan. The gravel continued to crunch under my boots. Each step felt heavier than the last. I thought about Maya. I thought about the way her eyes had sparkled when she told me she was the upgrade. She was probably sitting in the circle of reflection right now, pretending to be a victim, waiting for her next target. I had taught her well. I had taught her that empathy was a trap and that mercy was a weakness. I wondered if she would feel the same coldness I felt when her time came. I wondered if the system would ever run out of people to consume, or if it would just keep refining itself until there was nothing left but a single, perfect, lonely algorithm. I reached the main road. No cars passed. The world was still asleep, unaware of the ideological victory that had just taken place in the woods. I looked at my hands. They were clean, too clean. They hadn't touched anything real in years. I took the shadow device, the brick of lead and silicon, and I threw it. I didn't throw it with strength. I just let it drop into the deep, murky water of a drainage ditch by the side of the road. It sank without a sound. I waited for a sense of relief. It didn't come. There was only the wind, the trees, and the terrifying, unmapped territory of a life without a mission. I was Dana. I was 29. And for the first time, I was truly, completely, and irrevocably offline. The road ahead was a blur of gray asphalt and green pines. I started to walk, my shadow lengthening behind me, a dark shape that followed me into the light of a day I didn't know how to live. As the hours passed, the silence grew louder. I found myself noticing things I had previously categorized as superfluous data. The way the dew clung to the spiderwebs in the bushes. The specific, rhythmic chirping of a bird I couldn't identify. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. These weren't ideological markers. They weren't systemic flaws. They were just things. They existed without my permission. They existed without a file. I reached a small gas station at a crossroads. It looked ancient, fictional almost. The last stop provisionary. I walked inside, my charcoal gray suit covered in a fine layer of mountain dust. A man sat behind the counter. He was old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his hands calloused and stained with oil. Under any other circumstances, I would have scanned him and seen a biological debtor, a relic of a patriarchal age that needed to bed out. I would have looked for a reason to judge him. He looked up from a crossword puzzle. "You look like you've been through the brush, miss. Car breakdown." I opened my mouth to deliver a sharp, clinical rebuttal. I wanted to tell him that his gendered assumptions about my mechanical competence were a microaggression. I wanted to audit his vocabulary. But the words didn't come. They felt heavy, like stones in my mouth. I looked at him, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't see a category. I just saw a man. "No," I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow in my own ears. I'm looking for a way home." "Well," he said, gesturing to a dusty landline phone on the wall. "Payphone's over there. Though I don't know who's hiring cabs this far out. There's a bus that comes through around noon. Goes down to the hub." "Thank you," I said. The word felt alien. Thank you. It was a social lubricant, a performative submission I had once written in a white paper for Veritas Global Solutions. But as I said it, I felt a tiny, microscopic crack in the ice around my heart. I sat on a wooden bench outside the station, waiting for the noon bus. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look at the screen. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap. I thought about the people I had liquidated. I thought about Arthur Sterling. I wondered if he had a family. I wondered if he was sitting in his own version of this silence right now, wondering where it had all gone wrong. I didn't feel radical empathy for him. Not yet. But I felt a strange, shared space of existence. We were both casualties of a war I had helped to escalate. A car pulled into the station, a sleek, black SUV with tinted windows. My heart skipped a beat. Was it Axiom? Was it Maya, coming to finish the job, to ensure I didn't even make it to the hub? The door opened and a woman stepped out. She was young, dressed in a sharp, navy blazer. She looked like me. She looked like the me from 3 days ago. She was holding a phone, her thumb moving with the speed of a hummingbird's wing. She walked past me without a glance, her eyes fixed on the screen. She was talking into a wireless earpiece. "Yes, I have the files," she said, her voice crisp and cold. "The audit is complete. We can move on the VP by Monday. He's got 3 discrepancies in his 2019 travel expenses. It's enough for a forced resignation. No, don't worry about the fallout. The narrative is already set." I watched her. I saw the intensity in her eyes, the way her jaw was set in a permanent line of judgment. I saw the ghost of myself. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and tell her to stop. I wanted to tell her about the lake, about the lead-lined medical kits, about the way the system will eventually find a newer version of her. I wanted to tell her that the void she was building wouldn't just hold her enemies, it would eventually hold her too. But I didn't. I knew she wouldn't listen. I wouldn't have listened. To her, I was just a dusty woman on a bench, a data point of failure. She went into the station, bought a bottle of expensive alkaline water, and came back out, never once looking at the mountains, the trees, or the old man behind the counter. She got back into her SUV and sped away, leaving a cloud of exhaust and gravel in her wake. The bus arrived at 12:15. It was an old, rattling thing, painted a faded yellow. I climbed aboard and sat in the back. There were only 2 other passengers, a woman with a crying toddler and a teenager with headphones around his neck. The toddler was screaming, a raw, piercing sound that filled the cramped space of the bus. In my old life, I would have analyzed the mother's failure to regulate the environment or the societal imposition of child-rearing on the female identity. Now, I just watched the mother. She looked exhausted. She was rocking the child, singing a low, off-key song, her eyes closed. She wasn't an ideological agent. She was just a person trying to get through the day. I reached into my bag and found a small, wooden owl, the one I had taken from the mantel of my cabin at the sanctuary. I hadn't even realized I'd packed it. It was a simple thing, carved with more heart than skill. I leaned forward and held it out to the child. The screaming stopped. The toddler looked at the wooden bird, his eyes wide and wet. He reached out a chubby hand and took it. The mother looked at me, her eyes weary but grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's okay," I said. And for the first time in my 29 years, I didn't mean it as a tactical maneuver. I didn't mean it as a social engineering hack. I meant it. The bus rumbled down the mountain, moving away from the verdant sanctuary, away from the shadow devices and the strategic erasures. The city appeared on the horizon, a forest of glass and steel, glowing in the afternoon sun. I knew what was waiting for me there. I was unemployed. I was canceled. I was a pariah in the only world I had ever known. My bank accounts were probably being audited, and my reputation was a charred ruin. But as I looked at the city, I didn't feel the old urge to conquer it. I didn't feel the need to find the rot and cut it out. I just wanted to walk down a street where no one knew my name. I wanted to sit in a park and watch the world go by without trying to categorize it. I wanted to learn how to be a person again instead of an algorithm. I looked at the teenager with the headphones. He was staring out the window, lost in his music. I wondered what he was listening to. I wondered if it was beautiful. The bus pulled into the terminal. I stepped off, my suitcase in hand. The noise of the city hit me, the honking of horns, the shouting of vendors, the hum of a million lives intersecting. It was loud. It was messy. It was unoptimized. And it was real. I walked toward the subway, blending into the crowd. I was just another woman in a gray suit, another face in the sea of humanity. I didn't have a file on anyone here. I didn't have a dossier. I reached into my pocket and felt my official phone. It was still there. It was still wiped clean. It was a blank slate. I walked to a trash can and hovered my hand over it. I thought about throwing it away, like I had the shadow device. But then I stopped. Maybe I thought, I don't have to be a virus. Maybe the system isn't just a machine to be broken or a weapon to be wielded. Maybe it's just a collection of people, all of them as flawed and frightened as I was. I put the phone back in my pocket. I wouldn't use it to destroy. I wouldn't use it to audit. I would use it to call my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in 6 years. I had told her she was a victim of the traditionalist cage and that her life was a cautionary tale of patriarchal compliance. I wanted to tell her I was sorry. I wanted to ask her how her garden was doing. I walked down into the subway station, the cool air of the underground rising to meet me. I found a seat on the train and watched the lights of the tunnel flash by. I am Dana. I am 29 years old. And for the first time in my life, I am not the architect of anything. I am just a passenger, traveling through a world that is far too big, far too complex, and far too beautiful to ever be truly controlled. The train emerged from the tunnel, crossing a bridge over the river. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. It was a natural aesthetic that I would have previously dismissed as distraction from the work. Now, I just watched it. I watched the way the light danced on the ripples, the way the boats moved slowly against the current, the way the sky seemed to stretch on forever. I was alone, but for the first time, the silence didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a beginning. I reached for my phone, my fingers steady. I scrolled to a contact that had been buried under layers of ideological vetting and systemic purging. Mom. I pressed the call button. The phone began to ring. 1, 2, 3. Hello, a voice answered, a soft, familiar voice that sounded like home. Mom, I said, and the word felt like a key turning in a lock I had forgotten existed. It's Dana. Can we talk? And as the train carried me deeper into the heart of the city, I realized that the digital detox hadn't failed. It had just worked in a way I never expected. It hadn't stripped away my noise, it had stripped away my armor. And underneath, I found that I wasn't an architect or a strategist or a social engineer. I was just a woman, standing in the light, ready to start the long, slow work of becoming human again. The mission was over. The purge was finished. And as I listened to my mother's voice on the other end of the line, I knew that the void was finally starting to fill with something new. Something real. Something that couldn't be deleted. I stepped off the train and into the evening air, the city lights twinkling around me like a million tiny possibilities. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a file. I just had the sound of a voice I loved and the infinite, terrifying, wonderful freedom of the unknown. I was Dana. I was 29. And I was finally, truly alive.